Okay, good evening, everyone. It's so lovely to see you all on my screen before me. My name is Lara Kelly. I'm working with the Dominican Sisters in Cabra and with the AEFJ in Ireland. So it's lovely to see you all. You're very welcome to this evening's webinar, the title of which is The Impact of Reduced Foreign Aid in Africa, a Practical Response Through the Doughnut Economics Lens. So without further ado, we'll be recording the session, so just to let you know that. And if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. There will be time at the end for some group work and also for some questions and answers. So we look forward to hearing from everyone about your experiences and your thoughts on this issue. I'm going to hand over now to Jim Owens from the Spiritans for a brief welcome and an introduction to the AEFJ in Ireland and what we're all about. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Lara. Jim here. So welcome to everybody for joining us, and thank you for taking time. Many of you are familiar with the AFGN. It is an international faith-based network to promote economic justice between the EU and African countries, especially countries in sub-Saharan region. And just to let you know, the Irish branch has support of many religious congregations and societies. And at present, the Irish branch the Irish branch has support. At present, the active group in the Irish section include the Dominican Sisters, as Lara has said, the Presentation Sisters, the Medical Missionaries of Mary, the OLA Sisters, the Association of Missionaries and Religious of Ireland through their Justice Office, the Presentation Brothers, the Salesians, and the Spiritans. So, as we know, in the last 2 years or so, so much has changed in our world of politics and economics. And this evening, we are focusing on, as Lara has just said, the impact of reduced foreign aid in Africa. So we will look at the painful effects and suggest alternatives. And to help us focus on our webinar, I just want a short quote from the recent exhortation, the Lexi Te by Leo XIV. For many people, it has become normal to ignore poor people and live as if they do not exist. It then likewise seems reasonable to organize the economy in such a way that sacrifices are demanded of the masses in order to serve the needs of the powerful. So, with that in mind, thank you for joining us, and please participate fully in this important webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. We're now going to have a reflection called Africa from Sister Bridget Corrigan from the Medical Missionaries of Mary. So I'm just going to share the screen and Bridget's slides. Just bear with us a moment. And it'll be over to Bridget. Okay, over to you, Bridget.
You're on mute, Bridget.
As our webinar this evening is directed to the concern for those people in the world who are most in need, we start with a reflection using the inspiring words of the late Pope Francis, mostly from the encyclical Laudato Si, and which Pope Leo now is also committed to. He said, "I want a church which is poor and for the poor." What does the cry of the poor express, if not their suffering and their solitude, their disappointment and their hope? Kindness is the firm and persevering intention to always will the good of others. A little bit of mercy makes the world less cold and more just. Too often we participate in the globalization of indifference. May we strive instead to live global solidarity. The poor do not need intermediaries, but the personal involvement of all those who hear their cry. Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity, it is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. A preferential option for the poor means that we think first about the needs of those who are the most vulnerable. We believe in putting people in most need first. And poverty is caused by human beings, and it can be overcome and eradicated by their actions. Jesus taught that when we feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, look after the sick, and visit those imprisoned, we are looking after him. The poverty that kills is squalor, the result of injustice, exploitation, violence, and the unjust distribution of resources, and the result of a throwaway culture. This squalor corrodes any spiritual dimension. Young people often wander in search of what is missing in their lives. If they encounter the poor and vulnerable, they may arrive at what truly matters in life: gratuitous love. The poverty that sets us free results from a responsible decision to concentrate on what is essential in life. Creator God, renew in us your vision of wholeness, that the rich may restore wealth to the poor, and the poor share blessings with the rich. Revive in us a passion for justice, that the tyranny of profit be quelled and whispers of freedom find voice. Refresh in us our sense of calling, that we may follow Christ in serving others and live simply with those who simply live. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you very much for that lovely reflection and those lovely words of Pope Francis. Living simply with those who simply live. What a lovely idea. And to restore wealth to the poor. So much of what we're going to be talking about this evening are the cuts in aid, but also the effect that those cuts are having. And we know that countries in the developing world are now facing a debt crisis, which we talked about in the Jubilee 2000 campaign so many years ago, 25 years ago. And that idea of restoring wealth to the poor seems as distant as ever. But I hope that we'll make some inroads with our conversations this evening and gain a deeper understanding. So thank you again, Bridget. I'm going to pass over now to Tony Pike from the Amari Justice Office to give us a little bit of a background on the purpose of this webinar. So over to you. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Lara, and good evening, everyone. We're all very much aware of the dramatic changes in the whole humanitarian and international aid sector, and in particular the shocking news from America of the shutting down of USAID. The USAID is the US Agency for International Development, and it was established in 1961 through an executive order by President John F. Kennedy. And it was a consolidation of a number of programs. In absolute terms, the US has been the largest donor, providing more than $55 billion in official overseas development assistance, ODA. That's a statistic from 2023. Some reports claim that it's higher at $71.9 billion, But if we use a $55 billion figure, this accounts for around 30% of the total overseas development assistance of all development assistance committee, the DAC countries, and there's 30 countries that make up the DAC group, including Ireland. Among these DAC countries, the US ranked only 25th out of the 30 members in terms of ODA relative to a country's national income. So in terms of national income, the US allocated just 0.24%, whereas countries such as Norway allocated 1.9% of their income, or Luxembourg 1%, exceeding the UN 0.7 target. The UK ODA as a percentage of its national income is 0.58% and falling. And Ireland, if we exclude the Ukrainian refugee costs, our ODA for 2023, 0.38%. If we look at the impact of aid across the world, there are many studies and reports that document the positive impact of international aid. A recent study by the Lancet that US aid has helped to save more than 90 million lives in the past 2 decades. If we look at just one example, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, that's helped to save millions of lives since 2003. Within this was the provision of life-saving antiretroviral treatment for 11.5 million people, supporting a reduction in global deaths from the disease by almost half since 2005. Now, all of this ended very abruptly in January this year when the second Trump administration ordered a near total freeze of foreign aid. And then on the 1st of July, the agency was dramatically shut down after 6 decades, laying off 95% of its staff, shredding classified documents, and immediately cancelling 83% of its contracts. Humanitarian and development projects and programs around the world stopped. Many aid organizations and NGOs who were funded by USAID were forced to immediately stop essential life-saving works and humanitarian responses, some in life-threatening conflict situations. According to Oxfam America, as a result, at least 23 million children stand to lose access to education, and as many as 95 million people would lose access to basic healthcare. This study by the Lancet projects that the cuts to USAID could result in 14 million preventable deaths by 2030. 4.5 million of these are children under the age of 5. The study concluded that the discontinuation of PEPFAR alone would cause as many as 10.75 million new HIV infections and 2.93 million deaths related to HIV. A shock, the study warned, for low and middle income countries will be like similar in scale to a global pandemic or major armed conflict. In 2024, for example, PEPFAR funds accounted for 14% of the entire health budget of Zimbabwe. And according to the Centre for Global Development, the extent that more people haven't died so far is because contractors and grantees have found ways to continue to provide essential services by covering the costs that USAID should have paid. Cuts to ODA are part of a trend across the Western world. In the EU, there is a reduction in official development assistance due to significant cuts by member states, primarily as a response to increased defence spending and shifts towards a nationalist political agenda. This has led, in real terms, to an 8.6% drop in ODA by EU member states in 2024 compared to the previous year, and is a trend that is projected to continue. Ireland is a little different for now. In its latest budget, Ireland increased its ODA by 30 million euros, totaling 840 million. And Australia recently announced a tripling of its annual HIV development funding to Papua New Guinea to almost 6 million in response to the country's declaration of a national HIV emergency. The impact of the death of USAID and the trending cuts across the EU and DAC raises serious concerns in meeting our commitments under the Sustainable Development Goals and ensuring that no one is left behind. For example, for the continent of Africa to achieve its SDG targets, it needs to bridge a substantial financing gap of between $670 and $762 billion in the next 5 years. It is important, however, not to overstate the impact of ODA. Foreign aid has not been the single major driver of development progress over the last 20 years, nor will it, and nor should it be in the future. Aid works alongside improved leadership, good governance, and hard work within developing countries. And research shows, and I quote, that a sustained inflow of foreign aid equivalent to 10% of GDP is roughly expected to raise growth rates per capita by 1 percentage point, which for developing countries with per capita growth rates of between 3 and 4%, that 1 extra percent is a very important addition. So long-term development progress depends on economic and political institutions that are built over time in low-income countries and the actions taken by them, and aid can help to support the development progress along the way. But with the declining trend for aid support, where does this leave us in the future? Well, this is the focus of our webinar tonight. What is the impact of reduced ODA to Africa, and how can we explore new models of sustainable development through the lens of Doughnut Economics? Now, I was hoping that this evening, John Moffat, the CEO of Mission Cara, would be here to have a discussion. I don't think John is here, is he?
No sign yet, Tony.
There's no sign yet. Okay. Well, that's a shame because John has a unique take with working through Mission Cara and through the various religious congregations and religious faith-based organizations who make up members of Mission Cara. And one of the responses that I heard him speak about at another event was that the importance of the approach to development by religious congregations. Here's John now. Thank you. I'll let John answer these questions. Will I admit him? Yeah.
Great. We'll let him draw breath.
Yes. John just wanted to make me sweat. But it's when I'll let John talk about it, but there is a unique contribution to development over a sustained period of time and also into the future, where religious congregations aren't hugely dependent on, they're able to respond directly. Hi, John.
Hi, Tony. Sorry, I'm running a few minutes late. Apologies for that. Yeah.
No, I had just done my own kind of input there around the changes in the future around, well, currently and in the future around reduced aid and some of the impacts of that, specifically looking at US aid as an example. And I was just introducing yourself, or certainly Mission Cara. So what I'll say first is that John is the CEO of Mission Cara. He was appointed a CEO in April 2020 and has over 25 years experience in international development, including previous roles as CEO of Tree Aid and Program Director for Self-Help Africa. So thanks so much, John, for showing up. And I think perhaps if you might start, for those who may not know exactly who and what Mission Cara does, might you just give us a quick background of that?
Sure, Tony, and good evening, everyone, and apologies again for being a few minutes late joining you. One of those days at work, I'm afraid, and just a little bit late leaving the office, so apologies for that. Yes, Mission Cara, for those of you who don't know, Mission Cara was founded in 2004, first as the IMRS, the Irish Missionary Resource Services. And how it came about, Mission Cara was set up really as the APSO program that was funded by Irish Aid was coming to an end, and Irish Aid were keen to find a new mechanism to continue to fund and support the missionary development work overseas. And so we were set up initially, and I suppose when we were set up, it was really to continue to provide that personnel support to the many missionaries that were overseas from Ireland still at that time in 2004. And over time, the relationship with Irish Aid has evolved and changed, and the relationship with our members has evolved and changed. and we've moved more towards project support opposed to personnel support over the intervening years. So currently Mission Cara has 77 members. That includes 74 missionary organizations led by sisters, brothers and fathers, congregations and societies, Beatories Christi, volunteer sending agency, and also the Church Missionary Society of the Church of Ireland and the Presbyterian Church in Ireland as well. Our members work globally, so they have a presence in Africa, Asia and Latin America, working in over 50 countries. And last year in 2024, we supported 52 members with their projects in 43 countries, with a reach to approximately 1.9 million people. So, it's an amazing reach that you are able to achieve. That's pretty much like a third of the population of Ireland that we're reaching through our development work each year with with what is, in real terms, like it's not a huge budget. That's 13.8 million that was spent on projects last year. So it's an incredible reach for that kind of money, and through the membership. In addition to the funding support that we provide and the grants that come from Irish Aid, Mission Cara also works with our members to support capacity development, strengthening, providing training, mentorship, advice, and support where we can. And hopefully we remain reactive to your needs and work with you on the development programs. And I suppose one of the things we're looking at as we move forward, as times continue to change, is really working towards a strategy of localization to support support our members and their project teams to transfer control and power as part of the transition with the decline in Irish missionaries serving overseas to local missionaries coming from Africa, Asia, Latin America to take on the leadership roles in the mantle, and to continue to carry forward the legacy of the Irish missionary work that has been ongoing for so many years. And with that legacy as well, to hold the charisms as we move forward and continue to deliver the development work that they've been doing exceptionally well over so many years, and to continue that tradition. Anything further you'd like to know, Tony?
Could you give us just a few examples of what that means, kind of the projects and programs, and the unique approach of missionaries in the past and into the future around the approach to development?
So Mission Cara and our members, we support projects in 5 key thematic areas, which are health, education, climate resilient livelihoods, human rights, and emergencies, humanitarian support during emergencies. If I take a live example, because I was lucky recently to visit some of the programs that we support in South Sudan, largely education programs, where you go to a country like South Sudan, which is the newest country on earth. That's really came into its own around 2011. With very nascent service delivery in both health and education, and very poor governance, that evaporates the further you get from the capital. So the further you go from Juba out into the rural areas in South Sudan, the less likely you are to have service delivery. So there's a heavy reliance on the church to provide services where the government is unable to reach, particularly in schools. And if education is poor generally, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's much, much worse for girls to access education, particularly in a very patriarchal society. So one of the real examples of achievement is with the Loreto Sisters in South Sudan in Rumbek, where they have set up a school for girls, for secondary school that's drawing girls from all across the country. They have a capacity of 385 and have that filled. But also, I suppose one of the key achievements has been not just to set up a school and provide a high quality of education, but to work with community leaders and families to recognise the value of allowing girls to remain in school and complete their education rather than marrying them off at an early age in exchange for a bride price. And to get that agreement in place so that girls are enabled to finish their education and have opportunities that they otherwise would not have realised. Now that school is filled to capacity, there has been a request from some of the alumni of the school to start a new school in a wheel, so further north in the country, a slightly more difficult and harder to reach place, which of course, as part of the missionary approach to development is to find difficult places to work and operate and take on the challenge and, through faith and through hope and through, sheer willpower is to make it happen. So, there will be in 2026 a start to building a new school to double the, kind of the number of places for girls in education in South Sudan. Which is
That'll
great.
be a Loreto school, John, is it?
Sorry?
It'll be a
Sorry, John?
It'll be a Loreto school. Yeah, very
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So the ethos of the Loreto schools will also continue through as well, which is fantastic. So I mean, and that sort of for me exemplifies, if you like, the missionary approach to development, which is kind of different and unique to the way that other actors and civil society organizations undertake development. We undertook a piece of research about 8 or 9 years ago to articulate what it was that made the missionary approach to development unique and special, and came up with kind of 5 principles that interact with each other and taken together form a holistic approach to a missionary approach to development. Now, I will stress, this is not Mission Cara's model. This is what we have listened to and learned from the missionary organizations we work with, and taken and articulated and trying to document it to describe how missionaries carry out their development work. And the key principles are, I suppose, first of all, there's that long-term commitment. There's the commitment to go to and remain in places for a long time, which allows for the missionaries to really get a good understanding of the communities that they work with. And often what we find is that missionaries don't rush in to start development work, but actually take time to understand the community that they work with, take time to understand what the real needs are, and try and find a holistic approach and a people-centered approach to addressing the needs as they arise. There's also a sense of crossing boundaries, that desire and willingness to go to places, but also that connection that comes from people who have a shared faith, regardless of where they are. So, regardless if you're in South Sudan or you're in Ireland, there's a connection through the shared faith, which allows us to cross boundaries, yet find connection with other people, which is very important. Thirdly, there's the personal witness of the missionary values. So it's about kind of living within the communities. So again, what maybe separates missionaries from other types of civil society actors or NGOs is that willingness and ability to stay and live within the communities, rather than kind of driving in the big Range Rover and driving off again at the end of the day, but being there and being present and living with the poor. And I think that is has been seen as something that's very special and very important, and really welcomed by communities that work with. Fourthly, there's the prophetic vision, and I think this is really about kind of having the ability to speak up where you see injustice, and raise issues beyond the communities themselves, to take action and have that addressed. So it's been a witness to some of the injustices that that are there, and bearing witness to that, which is great. And lastly, it's the holistic approach. It's that putting the people at the center, recognizing that human beings are all dignified people with a wide range of capacities, needs, and rights, and addressing the holistic needs of the person rather than in isolation. So that's what we feel is unique about the missionary approach to development, and what we see as being the underlying principles that inform and feed into all of the projects and programs that Mission Cara supports.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we were just talking before, John, about the changing landscape of international development and cuts and freezes across kind of Western support. How do you see that as kind of impacting on the future of the work for missionaries, and how how they will be able to operate within that context?
To put it into a bit of context, first of all, Tony, I suppose, yes, it is worrying that there is a drop back in aid, but it's also worth recognizing that kind of the drop in aid to developing countries hasn't just started in the last year or two. It's really, aid to developing countries peaked in 2020. And while aid budgets have continued to go up over that period, really what's been happening is that more of the aid money has been staying in the donor country. For example, to support refugee programs in Ireland or the UK or other parts of the world, and it hasn't been making its way to the developing world. So there has been a reduction in spend over a longer period of time. It's also worth noting that up until 2023, aid budgets were increasing, and in 2023, the amount of money that was going into aid was about 19% higher than it had been in 2019. So, there was a rapid rise in aid expenditure in a short space of time, largely due to the COVID pandemic, which encouraged a lot of investment. It dropped back by about 7.1% in 2024 and 2023. And then this year, obviously, we've seen a significant cuts with the reductions in USAID. And we've seen moves across many of the OECD countries to lower their aid budgets.
Mm-hmm.
In the SDGs, by 2030, there's a target, I think it's SDG indicator 17.22, if I remember that correctly. There is a target for OECD countries to reach 0.7% by 2030. In 2024, that was around an average of 0.37%, so very far off that 0.7%. But what I think we can be hopeful about is, the drops are sudden, but they're likely to even out at around the same levels of ODA that were in place about 10 years ago. So that's still a very significant amount of money globally that's going into development. From the Irish perspective, in particular, I think there's a lot to be very proud of in that we have a government in place that is committed to retaining their current levels of ODA. Now, their current levels of ODA are about 0.58%, and it's gone up a little bit in the last budget, and they added an additional 30 million to the ODA for 2026, which is good, but it's nowhere close to getting us near the 0.7% by 2030. And also in relation to Ireland, if you strip out the amount of money that stays in Ireland to support refugees, or the amount of money that goes to Ukraine, the reality of what's going to what we would consider the developing world is more like 0.38%. So we're still quite low in terms of the amount of money that goes into development. But the commitment is there, and we have a good Minister of State in Neil Richmond who's very committed to his office and is fighting hard for the aid budget to be maintained and indeed increased. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't complications. I mean, I think when the USAID budgets were cut earlier this year, one of the big concerns was around the amount of money that was invested into health programming, particularly to support HIV programs. I think UNAIDS have predicted that due to the US cuts, the number of additional deaths the number of additional HIV infections between 2025 and 2029 will be about 6 million, and there could be up to 4 million additional deaths as a result of the cuts to the HIV treatment and prevention budgets across Africa. So it's fairly significant. Again, traveling recently in South Sudan and talking to representatives from WHO, a country like South Sudan, its health budget is 85% dependent on ODA. 2% comes from the government, and the rest of the funding comes from user fees for clinics. Now, this is a health service that is already, unable to provide the kind of service that's needed and the coverage that's needed to serve the whole population. The WHO, with the withdrawal of USAID money, are looking at making significant cutbacks in their funding. So countries like South Sudan will suffer. Health services that are already under significant pressure and strain will deteriorate. And there will be more reliance and pressure on external actors apart from kind of the government support services that are there and that have been receiving that funding to fill in the gaps. And that's a role, that missionary organizations, because of their charisms and their support for key basic services like health and education, will be looked to and will be looked to very strongly by the poor to kind of provide services around. I think it's always worth remembering, the largest non-state actor in the provision of education globally is the Catholic Church. And in Africa, the Catholic Church is the largest provider of education for girls. So, there is that focus in terms of kind of what communities rely on, who they can rely on. It's often not the government, it is often the church actors that they come to and look to for support, particularly around basic services. And that is important. Now, I think as well, just in terms of ODA, sorry, Tony, stop me if I'm rambling here at any point.
Yes, just 1 more minute.
Yeah. I was going to say, kind of with relation to ODA and indeed the kind of the rising debt burden that's faced across the globe. If I think back 20 years ago to the Jubilee campaign of the late 1990s, early 2000s, and the Drop the Debt campaign associated with that, it was the churches that led on that initiative and got the momentum and provided the ethical and moral leadership to take forward an initiative that had a significant impact on reducing the debt for highly indebted countries. At the moment, there's a real vacuum in society as to who's going to take the moral and ethical leadership to address some of these concerns around kind of the support that's needed to continue to raise people out of poverty and to raise developing countries to a level where they can compete, on a parity with the rest of the developed world. And I think there's something that we as a group of people and the churches need to be thinking about how we can reclaim some of that ground around the moral and ethical leadership and stand up and be the voice of the poor.
That's a brilliant way to end that, John. That's fantastic, because that is a call to action for all of us here tonight to step up to that plate. Thank you so much, John, for making the time tonight and for just kind of hitting the seat and running. But thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome, Tony. And again, apologies for being late.
No, you're grand. Thanks, John. Lara, I think. Yeah. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. And thank you again, John. It was great to have you here this evening. I hope that we'll have a chance later on in our groups to talk about some of the things that you'll take from listening to John and Tony's conversation there. But now we're going to bring you a video testimony from Africa, which Brian is going to share in a moment. And I just want to introduce the video first of all. So the testimony that you're about to hear is from Mary Nasimiu, who's a health worker in Kenya. She's going to share how aid cuts have harmed mothers, children, and people living with HIV/AIDS, and how hospitals are struggling to keep up. It's important to remember that many of these hospitals are run by faith-based congregations, and they've long been on the front lines of healthcare in Africa, often serving the poorest communities. When aid is reduced, their ability to continue this mission is severely affected. With that in mind, let's listen to Mary's story. Thanks, Brian.
I am Mary Nasimiu, working in a health facility in Kenya. I would like to share a little experience due to reduction of foreign aid from other countries. I would say that it has really affected our outcome of healing of our clients, especially in the area of AIDS. Antenatal mothers used to get free treatment, especially checkup, before they deliver. And if a client was found positive, this client was monitored closely. And at the end, when the baby is delivered, she's given antiviral treatment. And when the baby and the mother are monitored, the viral load of the mother will go down. And the baby will be negative. That was very good. But currently, because the women cannot afford this, they are not coming for checkup. Clients are being delivered, and babies now are being born with HIV/AIDS, and they cannot be traced. And now the viral load and HIV is increasing in the area. The adults who are diagnosed positive, they used to get free treatment. They come for checkup. And now, since the treatment is not there, some of them now are dying quietly in the village. The number of funerals has increased in the village. And others now find it very hard to come because they cannot afford the treatment. And this has affected the life of the people in the community, and the development in the area has gone down. When it comes to the workers, I'm working in a hospital owned by missionary sisters. And as a result of foreign aid being taken away, most of our workers have been sent away, approximate of 25%. And this has affected the outcome of our work. Most of the workers are burnt out. They are overwhelmed. And as a result of this, the patients are not taken good care of. The most suffering clients are the patients. and not to forget all about it. Even those sisters who are working in that hospital, they are also worn out because they don't have means to support the hospital. Some of the clients are teenage clients, some of them between 12 to 15 years. These girls cannot afford the essential items needed during the delivery, and the sisters do not have money to buy these things. And this one now will make them to be at risk, to be attended to traditional birth attendant outside. And while they are there are so many risks. Some of them bleed up to death. Some of them, the baby die immediately after delivery. Some of them, it has happened. Some have died under those women. This has happened because they are afraid to come to the hospital. They don't have the money to buy these essential items, which are like cotton wool, sanitary pads. Some of them, they are not able even to buy a towel for the baby. So they would prefer to go to those traditional birth attendants. Thank you very much for listening to my experience. And I take this opportunity to thank all our benefactors who have been supporting us in our country. And my hope and prayer is that they will continue to support our country and our people in the community. Thank you.
Thank you to Mary for sharing her story, and thank you for listening to Mary's words. Her testimony reminds us that aid cuts do not only affect patients, they also weaken the institutions, many of them faith-based, that have carried health services for decades in Africa. When these institutions are forced to reduce their staff and services, the entire community pays the price. The question for us is, how can international solidarity continue to sustain these frontline workers and the vulnerable populations they serve? The words of UN Aid Chief Tom Fletcher speaking about cuts in US aid, the maths is cruel and the consequences are heartbreaking. And I think we heard some of those consequences there in Mary's words. So thank you again to Mary Nasimiu from Kenya. We're going to turn now to looking at beyond aid and considering the longer term solutions. And I'm going to hand over to Abigail Nugent from Don Bosco Aid. Thanks, Abigail.
Thank you very much. I'm assuming you can see the slides okay. Please give a shout if you can't. Great. Okay. I'm just going to speak for a few minutes briefly about the idea of going beyond aid. So we've spoken about the importance of aid and how, it does so much really important work, really incredible work and life-saving work across the globe. But as Tony mentioned earlier, it's not the be-all and end-all in terms of long-term change. And what I'd like to look at briefly now is tackling the structural drivers of poverty. So it's kind of thinking about things a little bit differently. But let's go. Sorry there. It is not going on to the next slide. My apologies. So thinking about how aid is not enough. First of all, I just want to acknowledge again, briefly, how aid does play such an important role, that it brings food to people who are hungry, it brings shelter to people who are displaced or homeless. As we just heard earlier, it brings life-saving medicines and medical care to those who need it. So it meets immediate needs in a tangible way. But on its own, it's not enough to bring about the long-term changes we need for a just world. So what we need to consider are the root causes behind poverty, inequality, and other issues that are fueling the need for aid. So this image on the right, you can see is the inside of a boat that has a lot of water inside it. And if you think metaphorically speaking, if there's a lot of water in the boat, Are we looking to just bail the water out, or are we looking to fix the holes that are letting the water in? Sometimes aid can treat the sort of symptoms rather than the underlying root causes of poverty. So, yeah, these underlying structural issues can be sort of hidden. Sometimes we don't necessarily recognize them, but just here are a few that I'd like us to think about this evening. Climate change, the legacy of colonization, foreign debt, and unequal exchange. So I'm just going to talk briefly about these. With climate change, it is disproportionately affecting people in the global south, even though, as we know, it's mostly people in the global north who are contributing hugely to the greenhouse gases causing these changes in climate, which is hugely unfair. This is a driver of poverty. It's a driver of changes that are making life harder for many people in the global south. It's bringing about, droughts and irregular weather patterns that are making it harder for those who are living off the land, subsistence farming and all. It's driving people out of their homes. There's so many issues there. I can't go into all of them, but it's just a brief overview. Then from the legacy of colonization, you have huge inequalities in our world and a huge amount of exploitation. Also, just thinking about the injustices that are in our international trade system, which to me seems to be linked to this legacy of colonization. The trade system seems to really benefit wealthy countries at the expense of low-income countries. So there are tariff imbalances in the World Trade Organization, resulting in global South countries losing over 700 billion US dollars every year in potential export revenues for industrial goods. And a lot of us might not be aware of this, but it's a huge issue. We also have foreign debt, as was mentioned earlier. There are a lot of countries in the global South with crippling debt burdens, and they are on average giving over 400% more money in debt repayments than they're receiving in aid. So it's just crazy. And then this whole area of unequal exchange, this is a term used to describe how workers in the global south are paid artificially low wages for the goods that they produce for export abroad in comparison with the value of their labor. And it's been calculated that this system of unequal exchange costs countries in the global south a loss of between 2.8 and 4.9 trillion every year. Just to think about those figures for a minute, billion versus trillion, sometimes it can be hard to grapple with these enormous figures, but this is an image that shows, if you have $10,000 in a little bundle there, what looks like piled up in different stacks. You have here 1 billion. It's quite a lot you can see, but then when you look at the 1 trillion and you see just how massive it is, it's just crazy when you think that the amount that countries in the global south are losing due to all these unjust systems compared to how much is being given in aid. It's grossly unfair. So yeah, thinking about how we can move forward from these issues. So going back to the unequal exchange one, for example, it's been suggested that this could be tackled by introducing a global minimum wage so that it just wouldn't be acceptable anymore for workers in other countries in the global south to be paid so much less for their wages than we might pay a worker in Ireland, for example. So that's something that has been advocated for. Advocacy for more just economic systems in terms of the tariff imbalances in the World Trade Organization, and again, looking at foreign debt, whether we could cancel some of these unjust debts, which is obviously a huge thing, but still something that maybe we could advocate for. And also, as I mentioned earlier about climate change, just thinking about what actions, the actions that we can take in this area of climate change, how that can make such a huge difference in terms of and quality of life of people in the Global South. So those are just a few suggestions. There's so much more that we could look at here, but just our time is limited. So that's a brief overview for you here. And if any of you are interested in finding out more, some of what I spoke about here comes from this book by Jason Hickel, The Divide, which could be an interesting read if any of you would like to find out more. And there are also some references here if you'd like to read more. So these will be shared. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Abigail.
No
Thanks for
problem.
that. So we've heard from John about the missionary approach of listening, of getting to know local communities and using local knowledge. And we've just heard from Abigail about the structural drivers of poverty, unfair trade, and the need for structural changes. I'm going to look at this issue through the lens of Doughnut Economics, a model of sustainable economics that listens to and values the expertise of local and Indigenous communities, that is distributive and regenerative by design, that tackles structural inequalities, and that can be a compass for sustainable development from household to community to city to nation. So I'm just going to share my screen and some slides. Okay, so we're going to look at this issue through the lens of Doughnut Economics. And essentially, Doughnut Economics is a visual framework for sustainable development. It was developed by Kate Raworth, who's a UK-based and English economist and development worker. She worked for Oxfam GB. And she tried to come up with an economic model that would show the balance between the needs of the planet and the needs of people. And should we get that balance right, the space in the middle is the safe and just space for humanity. And as she drew this model on a piece of paper in 2012, she realized their resemblance to the donut, hence Doughnut Economics. So the aim of Doughnut Economics is for everybody to be in that safe and just space for humanity to thrive in. And so we have the ecological ceiling, which in the language of Laudato Si would be the cry of the earth, or the planetary boundaries as set out by Earth scientists in 2009. And the social foundation, or the cry of the poor, which is the Sustainable Development Goals set in 2015 to be achieved or not, unfortunately, by 2030. And so this is the donut in a little bit more detail. So you can see around the edges on the outer ring, the various aspects of the ecological ceiling. For example, ozone layer depletion, air pollution, climate change. And in the center, in more detail, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so anything that goes beyond the ecological ceiling, that's pushing the planetary boundaries too far, is considered an overshoot. And where people are falling below the basic necessities of life and falling short of the Sustainable Development Goals, this is the shortfall. So Doughnut Economics is a worldwide movement. This map is from the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is an organization or a network, a community that was set up by Kate Raworth to bring together Doughnut Economics activists. So you can see the spread of Doughnut Economics communities all around the world. And that's really important because we're learning from each other. And so as much as Doughnut Economics as a model talks about being distributive and regenerative in terms of economics, that's also the ethos of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So we share resources, we share ideas, and everything is in the Creative Commons. So Doughnut Economics, the current global picture. So as I mentioned, anything that pushes beyond the ecological ceiling is considered an overshoot. And unfortunately, you can see that we are overshooting in 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries, those being climate change, biodiversity breakdown, land conversion, freshwater disruption, nutrient pollution, and chemical pollution. And we can see almost all of those SDGs of the Sustainable Development Goals in shortfall, some more than others, political voice being one of those, social cohesion, peace and justice. This updated version was published on the 1st of October 2025, and this is a global snapshot. The next slide, I think, although it's quite detailed, is very interesting because it looks at Doughnut Economics and global inequality. So on the far left, you can see the graphic A, which shows the donut, essentially, the donut graphic for the poorest 40% of countries. And while it might be a little bit small on your screens, what I think you can probably see is that the poorest 40% of countries are doing very little, if anything at all, to push the ecological ceiling beyond its safe boundaries, its safe limits, and yet are falling short of so many of those basic necessities of life as set out in the Sustainable Development Goals. For the middle 40% of countries, we can see almost the same situation in the sense of not doing much to create the problems, but suffering the results. So contributing to climate change, yes, contributing to nutrient pollution, and then suffering in terms of falling into the hole of the social foundation for many of those. And if we look then at the graphic on the far right of the screen, we can see almost the inverse of the first graphic, of graphic A. So the countries that are doing the most, particularly in terms of climate change, which is massive there, a massive overshoot, and yet not many falling into the hole in terms of the social foundation and the basic necessities of life. So that's the richest 20% of countries on the far right. So we can take Doughnut Economics as both a lens and a compass. So I want to just take a couple of the social foundation aspects. So we're going to look at food. So 307 million people in Africa faced hunger in 2024. That's 1 in 5 of the population. The global figure is 1 in 11. Source is the WHO from 2025. Global aid for nutrition will fall by 44% in 2025 compared to 2022. And taking a specific example, the end of just 128 million US dollars worth of US funded child nutrition programs for 1 million children will result in an extra 163,500 child deaths a year, according to Oxfam. Looking at water. On the continent of Africa, approximately 411 million people, almost 1/3 of the total population, lacked basic drinking water services as of 2020. And turning to health, Nigeria alone has lost more than 600 million US dollars in health funding, equivalent to over 1/5 of its entire annual health budget. And turning our attention to the ecological ceiling, to the outer boundary, the outer ring of the donut, and looking at climate change. Africa is responsible for less than 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but it is the continent which is the least able to cope with the negative impacts of climate change. Global warming costs Africa up to 5% of its economic output, while the continent receives just 1% of global climate finance. So as much as we can use Doughnut Economics as a lens to look at the state of development of the Sustainable Development Goals and the state of the planetary boundaries and how much we're pushing them, we can also use it as a compass to guide our work and to bring us together. So I want to take a look at what's happening in terms of Doughnut Economics in Africa. So I'm going to look at Doughnut Economics groups in the Doughnut Economics Coalition for East Africa, in South Africa, the Tunisia Doughnut Group, Tanzania, and I'll also be taking a look at Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda as well. So I want to look first of all at Uganda. Last week was Global Doughnut Day Festival, so Global Doughnut Days, plural, festival, where Doughnut Economics activists from around the world came together. And I heard about this project in a Zoom meeting with the coalition, the Doughnut Economics Coalition for East Africa. And it's just a really fantastic initiative. So I wanted to share with you, I suppose, the purpose of this section of the presentation is to look at what's happening on the ground and how people are using Doughnut Economics as a framework for their work, whether that be on social development or on environmental justice. So these are activities in Uganda for biodiversity and clean air. BioAir Uganda is a youth-led climate action initiative dedicated to combating air pollution and restoring degraded ecosystems using innovative nature-based solutions. The work involves the development of biofiltration systems created from dried water hyacinth fibers, an invasive aquatic plant commonly found in Ugandan lakes. This approach not only addresses the serious environmental threat of water hyacinth infestation, but also offers a low-cost, sustainable solution to air pollution. So I just thought that was such a brilliant and creative solution, both to improving the water quality in the lake itself and thus improving biodiversity there and aquatic life, but also to use these dried hyacinth fibers as a filtration system to clean the air. So it's tackling, I suppose, two elements of the donut, which I really loved. I want to share now Kazi Yetu from Tanzania. So Kazi Yetu is an organization that was founded to change the way that products are made and traded between Africa and the rest of the world. So something that Abigail alluded to in her presentation. Commodities that are exported from Africa are mostly processed and packaged abroad, minimizing economic gain in the country of origin. Kazi Yetu was founded in 2018 with a focus on products made 100% in East Africa to promote job creation for women and more equitable pay for farmers. And they're also involved in the Doughnut Economics Coalition. To take a look at what they're doing in terms of Doughnut Economics in Tunisia, this is actually an upcoming event. It's happening later this week. So they're having a meeting on Doughnut Economics and the story of Tunisia's agricultural sector. So looking at the transformative lens of Doughnut Economics to map out the current social and ecological impacts of Tunisia's agricultural sector. So Doughnut Economics can be a guide for us to look at our impact, our environmental footprint, and also our impact in terms of the social situation, social justice situation, both locally and globally. In Nigeria, they're working to make the connection between Doughnut Economics and gender inclusion. So this is some activities that were happening over recent weeks that were shared last week during Global Doughnut Days. And in Nairobi, Doughnut Economics activities that are happening. They're having a swap circle there for clothing. And I wanted to share another one with you, which was the Stewards of the Forest. So this was an activity that happened again in recent weeks. And it was a guided forest walk looking at the relationship between city and forest. And it was organized by the Doughnut Economics Coalition of East Africa. It took place in the Ngong Road Forest in Nairobi. And it's trying to, I suppose, place value on those green spaces, particularly in cities. And when I heard about this project, I thought of parallels with a project in Derry, which is the Garva Forest Project. And again, it's valuing our forest, looking at how much carbon it captures, and just, I suppose, valuing the biodiversity and the green space that it brings. So again, that's the beauty of the Doughnut Economics network, is hearing about these stories. And I wouldn't have heard about those stories except for the Doughnut Economics Action Lab and this Global Doughnut Days, which were held last week. So just to say, if anybody is interested in finding a little bit more out about Doughnut Economics and the Action Lab deal, the website is there, and these links will be shared as well as the recording, but it's doughnut-economics.org. And before I finish, I just wanted to share two stories that I came across in reading up for this webinar. And I suppose it's just to try and see perhaps if there is maybe a silver lining isn't quite the right word when we're hearing about so much devastation. But this was an interesting article from DevX, a development media service. And it says, African nations see a silver lining after aid cuts. The aid cuts are here, but so is a shift in mindset, from domestic taxes to philanthropic models to concessional loans. New financing models are taking shape. And after that, I read about a new tax that has been introduced in 2018 in South Africa, the Health Promotion Levy, a tax on sugary drinks that's being put into the health service. So as difficult as many of these cuts are, there's perhaps some innovative and some different thinking happening as part of that. And the second story I wanted to share were that hopes are rising for a green economy boom at the Africa Climate Summit. So this is from the Guardian newspaper from September of this year. Renewables are thriving, with Africa breaking solar energy records, but there is still a financing gap. So there's perhaps two kind of hopeful stories there to finish on. And I think that there's just so many parallels between the work of sustainable development, the words of Laudato Si, the answering the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, and the whole model of Doughnut Economics. So just to say thank you very much. I'll also share, when we share this recording, a publication that we've done in the Dominican Sisters Cabra, which I'm just going to show you on screen now, which might be of interest to some attendees. It's bringing faith communities into the donut, and it's the work of the Dominican Sisters on Doughnut Economics, and in particular on making the links with Laudato Si. So I think I need to, as chair of this Zoom now, stop myself from talking. And I'm going to now turn our attention to some group work that we're going to have. So we're going to divide up, and Brian shortly is going to divide us up into groups. If you want to say a word on that in a second, Brian. We're going to divide up into groups to discuss two questions. The first, what stays with me from what I've heard this evening? And the second, how can I make a difference? We'll take 10 minutes in our groups to discuss these questions. And then Brother Kevin Mascarenas from the AEFJN Ireland will gather us together and gather your feedback, group by group. And feel free also if you want to add your response in the chat, or if you have any specific questions, perhaps for John Moffat, in the chat as well. Okay, Brian, do you want to?
Thanks. Thank you,
divide
Lara.
us up? Thank you.
Just to say that there is somebody, I think, from the AEFJN in every one of the groups. So it will be the job of that person maybe to try and capture a sentence or two from the group so that we can feed back afterwards, and we're conscious of time, so we'll get to it. So I'll break everybody into a group, and when that's done, if there's anybody left, I'll just assign you manually. Okay, thank you. It's 8:10 now, so at 19 minutes past 8, I think I'll begin the process of closing. Um, there are a number of people I think haven't joined groups because they're not in front of their cameras.
maybe let's see, we'll see if we can say something now. And I don't really know. Will I say not now? Okay. Now, we put up our hand. Say something and see if they can hear us. Let's chat.
Okay, Brian, I've just suggested that my group leave our meeting room. I don't know if, are you going to pull everybody else back out or? Okay, people are appearing.
Yeah, I've just pressed the button, so it takes 60 seconds.
Amazing. Brilliant. Lovely. Okay, we can see people coming back into the main session, which is great. I'll just wait till everybody is back. And then I'll hand over to Kevin.
Kevin, I think, is still in the process of
In his
rejoining the
group.
main group. Yeah,
Perfect. Okay.
here they all come now.
Here we are. Yeah, brilliant. Great. Great. I think we have our full group back. So thanks, folks, for participating in our breakout groups there. I hope you had some good discussions. We've got 7 to 10 minutes left, if you don't mind us running over by a few minutes. Let's say 10 minutes, if that's okay. So I'm going to hand over to Brother Kevin Mascarenas, who's, as I said, is a member of the AEFJ in Ireland, and he's going to go around the different groups and ask for 1 minute of feedback from each group. And what we'll do is just try and build on the feedback. So if you're giving feedback from your group and half of what you're about to say has already been given by another, you might just briefly add to it and really just focus on adding new content. So thank you, and over to you, Kevin.
Yes, thanks very much. So as Lara said, that we have about a minute each for the groups, and I think maybe our group can spoke about is the inequality in our world today, and how we educate people in this area, and the impact of faith in this kind of work as well. It was also noted that it's good that Ireland is still committed to this global to our development in Africa and all other parts. So how do we overturn this global thing that is happening in our world today? So this was something that we spoke about in our group.
Okay, thank you. Shall I go next, Kevin?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you. So my group, I suppose the word horrific came up a number of times in relation to the idea of babies being born with AIDS, and that being down to a lack of money, just being so difficult to hear. We also, coming on from Abigail's presentation, talked about people who are working so hard in production but getting so little, and that then sparked a conversation about buying fair trade. We spoke about seeds of hope and how important they are, and people saw seeds of hope in some of the Doughnut Economics projects happening around the world, which say that the hope is intertwined and the projects are intertwined. One thing can lead to another, and it gives hope to everyone. One person said it has to begin with me, and we talked about personal responsibility and personal action. And we also talked about the need for advocacy for systems change. And I mentioned the Climate Justice March that's happening in Dublin on Saturday, the 15th of November at 1 p.m., being organised by Stop Climate Chaos Coalition. So as one way to make our voices heard on the climate issue. Thanks, Kevin.
Our group, can I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So our group agreed to everything that you have said, and we're very impressed by the input and the information they got, and that the hope that came through particularly through the donut. They were impressed a lot by what was happening in Sudan and girls' education, and that also what Abigail said about how maybe trying to advocate around the just wage. Someone said that they had been in to see something in Pennies, which was really, really cheap, made in a country where they were getting very little in the wage. And I noticed come onto the air before, when maybe we could make some more advocacy around that. Otherwise, we were really happy with, and support everything that said, that the hope, particularly around the Doughnut Economics. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Will I go next, Kevin?
Sure,
Tony?
no problem.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same stuff. One of the impact on the ground was particularly in the health sector and access to HIV and ARVs treatment. One of the things that was mentioned was around that it'll bring about a change on the ground, which, as Lara had pointed out from some of the projects, that it is not forcing, but it is encouraging those on the ground in different countries to find creative ways towards their own development. Another was around that there hasn't been a massive change in reality of the statistics of the funding, so that development programs have continued despite very little change in the overall aid that has been given over the last few years. And the people were very taken by the video and the impact on the ground, that before services were free, and now, because people can't afford the charges, they're going back to birth attendants. Sister Rita, it was great to have Sister Rita on, because Sister Rita was on AEFJN 20 years ago. She was saying, and that, that it's important for us to continue to advocate for the various issues, and that taking our own action. And then lastly, it's very important to continue and to be sure that we listen to the people in the community and what they need in response to how we respond. I think that was everything.
Okay. And from group 3, which I must say was very energizing. I must say it would encourage the idea of a breakout group. It was great. People commented that this is going to be very tedious work, but very, very important, because we're in some ways we're destroying our earth, and that the whole question of what can I do personally, that's the question came up a bit. We had a contribution from Madagascar, which was just marvelous. That this event is so global. We were very impressed with John Moffat's presentation and about the outline of the 5 principles. So that's, and most of the other things have been said. But I must say, good energy in the group, good enthusiasm. But what can I do personally, as well as within a group or within, So thank you very much. We got a contribution from the medical missionaries. I'm not too sure, did Sister Bridget, was Miss Sister Bridget in that group? Or
No, I wasn't.
Okay, so they need to be called in, because they had some contribution. They had contributions to make. So I don't know, can you call in the medical missionaries group?
Can you do that, Laura?
I think it was Sheila from the Medical Missionaries of Mary. Was it? Are you there, Sheila?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. Will you just add to what has been said, and maybe add 1 or 2 points? We had quite a big discussion, and a large number of us returned missionaries. And one of the things that struck us very forcefully was when John Moffat spoke about the work of Mission Cara, and in particular the research that they did around the characteristics of the work of religious orders as in missionary development work. We particularly tuned into, I suppose, the longevity of our work, and the fact that we are there for a long time, learning culture, getting to know the people, living alongside them over a very long period of time. This is a great hope, but it's also something in a call for action, because our sisters, who are mainly now African and South American, are also there, and they will live in the very same style, live among the people, live for a long time, appreciate and learn their culture as a way of working with them to tackle all the issues we've just tackled. We had a lot more to say, but I think that was probably, if I'm to take 1 point, we'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So is there any other groups left to report?
I think Abigail's group, I think. Was
Yes,
Abigail?
I was just going to jump in briefly there. So,
Thanks,
most of
Abigail.
the points were already
Sorry.
mentioned, but one thing was just the value of using the donut as a lens, and also how encouraging it was to see how that was being used in Africa. And then, in terms of making a difference, the question about how we can make a difference ourselves, some of the thoughts there were networking, simple living, and also one of the members in our group from Ghana mentioned how in this new context that they're being forced to sort of rethink what they do and maybe collaborate more. So I thought that was really interesting. But other than that, a lot of things were said already. So just to reiterate those. Thank you.
Thanks, Abigail.
So
Yeah,
we have
group 6, Kevin.
yes, from
Kevin.
Pat, you will give the group number 6. Thank you.
Yeah, reinforcing just some of the points that were made. One of them was the terrible suffering brought about for HIV sufferers, the cutting of the US aid, and not only those who were suffering, but the secondary consequences all the way along the line, their families and so on, the people living in the community and all those things. But a kind of another effect of it was to reduce the dependency on aid. That in the last participation, it showed that good things had come about in reducing dependency. So that's a very hopeful sign that you move from development received to development self-maintained. So that was one thing. Doughnut Economics received a positive viewpoint, and let's see more of it. Let us hear more. And then just some interesting things about promoting ourselves. First, that it be really tangible what we show, that we create awareness, which of course we're well used to, but that's to be stressed, and keep it in the forefront and keep it in our awareness at all times. So thank you. They're the 3 points we mentioned.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat. I don't know if it's a question or what to do as a much needed moral voice advocating for justice. Perhaps identify possible partnerships with organizations, groups already involved in trying to make a difference. Example, Chokra, CAFOID, CAF, proudly made in Africa, formerly valued added Africa. So I don't know if anyone wants to answer that question.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Tony, did you want to answer that one? You'd replied
Yeah,
to
no,
Gareth
it was just
Maureen. Was that from your group?
yeah, that was me. I missed the most important point is that we cannot do this together. We have to be in collaboration. We need to work together with organizations and individuals and groups who have a similar outlook and work together in moving forward. That's massively important.
Thanks, Tony. I'm aware that we're running already 5 minutes over, so
Yes.
thank you all for your patience.
Yeah.
But the conversations have been really fruitful, I think. So
Yes.
we'll bring it to a close in about 5 or 6 more minutes. So thank you so much for your participation. I think it'll be really interesting to even just to listen back to the recording because there was so much coming from the groups there. It was kind of hard to capture. But on the issue of collaboration and working together for justice, it might just be useful to mention Tony, I think maybe to mention the conference next April, or is it a little bit soon for that?
Well, it's a bit soon, but I mean, we
Just to
have the date. I
highlight
think
it.
it was the 18th. We're looking at a justice conference, organizing a justice conference at Kimmage. So to keep an eye open for the AMRI notice board and communications around this.
Brilliant. Thank you. And on the question of what can I do? I think Brian is going to mention our upcoming event. So I'm going to say thank you all very much, particularly to our speaker, to John Moffat, and to all of our presenters this evening and to all of you for being here. So I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Brian O'Toole, who's going to just say a few thanks and a few words about our next event and other issues. Thanks, Brian.
Just a couple of very short messages again because of time. I should put something into the chat. There are quite a few here from different orders who may not be part of AEFJ in Ireland, but if you thought that maybe yourself or a member of your congregation might consider joining us or being part of our group, I offer an email there that you can contact us. You can even turn up for a meeting or two without any binding commitment. We won't hold you to membership forever and ever and ever. But you can see some of the type of work that we do. Whilst it is busy, there are about 7 or 8 congregations. We'd love to see a few more. So that's the first thing, the members. The second thing I will say is with regards to the recording that of this event, we have the recording prepared. We will set it up in such a way that we will put it up on our website alongside all the other recordings of the other events that we have been preparing for you over the last number of years. You can have a look back on them, but we'll send the recording to you along with the research and the papers and everything that, if you like, inspired this webinar. So there was quite a number of documents and papers and resources that we used, so you can have a look back at all of those. So that will be sent out to you in a MailChimp early next week, we hope. Also in that MailChimp will be notice of a Safe Birth for All concerts that will be held at the end of November. And we only mentioned that because we did 2 webinars on Safe Birth for All, and those can also be watched back on our website, and we'll refer to them also. And the last thing to say, just to thank everybody again, is to say that we're planning to have an event as we normally do around the Christmas time, and it will be kind of a look back and a look forward, but perhaps taking into account the new exhortation by Pope Leo on Dilexity, and if you like, looking at the whole idea of consumption at Christmas from the point of view of those who are poorest. So with that, I'll leave you and thank you all for your participation. I apologize for keeping you a little bit beyond, but we hope it was worth it. So thank you indeed.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
And feel free to unmute if you want to.
I'll stop the record there now.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Brian.